Kanani. I'm here on behalf of the Africa Europe Foundation. I'm Chief Spokesperson at the Friends of Europe and one of their directors. I'm your moderator for this afternoon's very important discussion about young people and their involvement, their active involvement, and I suppose power sharing on the world stage on the issue of climate action and climate change. This debate takes place at a time when we have the Africa EU Week, and this is one of the key side events, and we're really pleased that we have partnered with the British Council. This is part of the Africa Europe Week, but also the British Embassy in Rome. So very pleased to have those partnerships. And obviously the European Commission is a key partner here, an agent of change, if you like, on this particular agenda. What we do know is that young people have factored and featured much more heavily over the years. Unfortunately, later than anticipated and later than what they would have wished, but nonetheless, better late than never. What we have today is a conversation about really trying to understand how do we move from fine words that, you often hear politicians saying, yes, young people are really important and we need to hear their voices, and nothing happens. And then suddenly you have one or two, glamour young people put on the table to say yes, 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 and then nothing really happens in terms of power sharing, active involvement in decision making, and being seen as part of the solution and problem solving, as opposed to window dressing around young people. So this conversation is about how do you ensure that young people are able to engage and enabled to engage, because actually in the context of Africa-Europe partnerships, and this is key in this, we know that Africa will be one of the youngest continents in the world. It'll be by far the youngest continent in the world in the next 10 years. And so therefore young people actually matter, not simply in terms of having their voice heard, but they will be the agents of change and political power in one of the most populous continents in the world. And it is also an area that's not been well served geopolitically and in partnership terms. And that's why we at the Africa Europe Foundation are doing all that we can to ensure we create a different kind of tone, climate and environment for this partnership, this critical and key. What we know from our debates, so we've run a number of debates over the past couple of years with young people, many of them are here today, and regularly and consistently, the big issue is that feeling not having a seat at the table, feeling as if they are to be regarded as furniture rather than actually part of the architecture of change. Often feeling that there are basically lack of confidence that leaders will do the right thing. And so there's a responsibility on all of us to make sure that we engage in this topic about climate action, knowing actually that the young people that we're referring to are going to be the inheritors of a planet that we've damaged. And so how do we make sure we limit that damage and make sure we create better, more sustainable livelihoods over time? So that's the measure of the debate and the issue. We first will want to show you a short video, which I will give you a view of some of the actions and issues that are emerging for young people.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Dear policymakers.
Dear fellow Earthlings.
We live in times where unfortunately scientists are struggling to separate the so-called fake news, so gathering real data is crucial.
And sustainable production is relatively more costly. So governments should help entrepreneurs into sustainable production through tax breaks.
We don't get to see our research outputs translated into public knowledge, policy, and implementation. We need to ensure that there are curricula from early on in the educational system. We need to be trained in what are the best and most efficacious ways to translate and communicate our research outputs.
More funding for climate and art-focused-led projects will allow more independent artists arts organizations and collectives across the world to innovate and create meaningful solutions to avert the impacts of climate change.
Artists should act as a creative force to policymakers on taking decisions and voting laws for the common goal. Artists have the power to forward the message for change in a political neutral way by using their creative side in order to recreate the voice of humanity and seek immediate action from those in power.
As artists, it is our duty to translate something abstract into an emotion that will set people into motion. Art is the language of the heart. And if we have learned one thing so far, it is that we do not need more heads involved, we need more hearts involved. Art can be that bridge, but therefore we need proper funding, we need space to work, and we need a place at the table where decisions are being made.
This is the right time to step in and share values with the surrounding society.
Our voices will not only matter, but will be heard.
And we need your help and your support to create the structures that allow that process to continue.
The clock is ticking, but we still have time to save humanity if we all act now.
We, as artists, cherish rebellious hope about our possibilities as joined forces.
Together, let's be stronger for the climate.
Powerful words, and as you say, lovely images, but also very, very powerful lines from young people, and reinforcing the points that I've just been making earlier on. I'm going to turn to the climate chief in the EU, Frans Timmermans, directly. Frans, very pleased to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to see you again. Thank you for being at Friends of Europe and the Africa Europe Foundation. We've had this conversation many times. We're at a juncture where we've had the last COP and we're moving towards the next. Europe plays a key part in that series, in that dialogue. Tell us, what's your, react to what you've seen, Frans, for me, and then also in terms of planning for the next COP, what are you going to do, and what's your plans around the active engagement of young people and youth action as we lead up to the next one in Egypt? Over to you, Frans.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. We did build up some experience at the previous COP and the pre-COP. I think both the Italians and the Brits did a great job in engaging more with young people, and young people had a huge influence in the preparation of the COP in Milan, the pre-COP, but also during the COP in Glasgow. They were part of the conversation on a daily basis. I also met with them on a daily basis. Of course, they are better informed than anybody else, not just in the general issues, but on the most complicated issues on the table. They know everything. And that makes our lives both more difficult and easier. Easier because you don't need to explain anything. More difficult because you can't get away with anything either. So I think we can build on that leading up to Sharm el-Sheikh and sort of expand that participation and perhaps even get young people more at the table when we're actually negotiating, not just reporting directly from the negotiations, but have them more actively involved. Now, if I may turn to the issue of what's on the table in the next COP, and I want to compare these two continents, these sister continents, Europe and Africa. So what do we have in common? We have in common our destiny. There is no way Europe is going to prosper if Africa doesn't prosper. And there's no way Africa is going to prosper if Africa doesn't get the space to prosper. It has the talents, it has all the possibilities, but it needs to get the space, it needs to get the technology transfers, the educational opportunities, the economic opportunities, investment opportunities. And I say this because we mirror each other. If you look at the demographics, Africa is an extremely young continent, and Europe is an extremely old continent in terms of our demographic buildup. So we're complementary in that sense. A generally more older continent is also generally more pessimistic, and a younger society is more optimistic. So here, I think Africa can really help us overcome our pessimism, which I think is too strong in Europe today. Now, the other issue is Africa hardly contributes to the emissions that have led to the rise of temperature. That's a huge European responsibility. But Africa suffers more than any other continent from the consequences of that European behavior. So I think this creates a common goal in keeping the temperature below 2 degrees and trying to still achieve 1.5, whereas we as major emitters have to do a lot of mitigation, but we'll only be credible on mitigation if we help Africa also to do more, much more, on adaptation, on just adapting your agriculture, your infrastructure, your energy resourcing, your educational systems, etc., to the climate crisis that is already upon us. And finally, I believe that in this interaction between two continents who completely depend on each other but are so different, the interaction between the positive dynamic between the two will have global resonance, and it will also address some of the major security issues we're dealing with. And I believe that this is something that goes beyond the climate crisis, that goes beyond the immediate tasks we have, but actually addresses the fundamental issue of how we organize living well together on a global scale, which is, I think, the biggest challenge of our generation. Finally, there is a very inspiring Flemish writer, David van Rijbroek, who has cornered the phrase that what we're actually doing now is colonizing the future. And I wanted to a bit provocatively put this on the table, because in the relationship between Europe and Africa, the word colonization has a very, very strong meaning.
Indeed.
And a very, very strong and painful legacy comes out of it. So I believe David is absolutely right to say if you live and consume and produce beyond your means, you're actually colonizing the future. You're colonizing the prospects of your children and grandchildren. And I wish we could get that idea into the heads of everyone in my generation, and then we could mobilize everyone in all generations to do something about it. And the final big request I have to the young people who are part of this conversation: never ever neglect those young people, those members of your generation who are not part of that conversation, who just don't have the luxury to think about the end of the earth because they're thinking about the end of the month and don't know how to get there, who just don't even have the minimal ways of getting around, of feeding themselves, etc., etc. So I think the solidarity should be between generations, but also within generations, because the risk of this day and age, created also by internet, by social media, is that we are perfectly comfortable and happy within our bubble, but that bubbles individually cannot change the world. But people working together and people disagreeing well and agreeing well is what brings democracies forward, is what brings societies forward. And I really appeal on everyone to leave nobody along the way, leave nobody behind when we make this transition happen. Thank you.
Frans, thank you very much. Extremely important words, lovely metaphor about colonization. And I'm glad you made that point about those who are very easily forgotten. And that's the vast majority of populations that actually don't have the means and don't actually have, as you say, the luxury to think about this. Can I just ask you one further prompt in terms of, we have the Africa EU Summit next week. Yesterday we had, I moderated a conversation with the Foundation on Ocean Governance, and there are a number of other debates happening. The key message that keeps coming through from all the experience we're having in the past year is about how does Europe create policy coherence? So its international development agenda, its digital skills agenda, its telecommunications agenda, etc., industrialization agenda. How do you weave that together more coherently in your partnership and relationship with Africa, or is that just too difficult a task because we can't do it at home?
No, I think the most important thing is to let Africa dictate Africa's priorities, and to listen to Africa's priorities, not think we can imagine Africa's priorities. We should be more modest. And if Africa has clear priorities, I think 600 million Africans still don't have access to electricity.
Indeed.
One of the priorities is to get them into electricity, and if African countries want that to happen, we should be able to accommodate the investments, we should be able to accommodate the technology transfer, but the priorities are set by Africa, and Europeans should finally have the courtesy to simply acknowledge that and be part of the development of those priorities in a positive sense. With solar energy being so cheap today, you can bring electricity to even the remotest parts of Africa without any problem at very low cost, so that 600 million Africans get access to electricity in the short term. And I think that would be a top priority, and all the other priorities can be subservient to those priorities set by African countries themselves.
Thank you, Franz. Thank you very much. I will come back to you. I'm going to, and very much, I think there's a lot of, we have hundreds of people here online. They're from all over Europe and all over Africa. So just warmly welcome all of you for joining from every part of Africa and Europe. It's really pleased to have you here. I'm now going to move on to Aya. Aya, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. You are, let me just say, your first ever African Union Youth Envoy. You're the chair of the Nala Feminist Collective. And what we'd like to hear from you is, you've been heavily involved in issues of young people's consultations, engagement, etc. Can you share, like I asked Franz, react to what you saw on that video and what you've heard, but also give your perspective on youth action and the scaling up of youth action from your perspective. Over to you, Aya.
Thank you so much for having me. My comments would briefly touch on 3 points: engagement, leadership, and the European Green Deal and what it means for Africa. And it seems my generation and the generation of Mr. Timmermans have different approach, because as he wants to colonize the future, I published yesterday about decolonizing the partnership. And I think this is the kind of conversation my generation is having right now, about decolonizing the Africa-Europe partnership. We should not be expecting political solutions to political problems when we feel as African youth that Europe still treats Africa as its savior and colonial master. So first, my point on meaningful youth engagement. I think we cannot host African leaders and not have young Africans in Brussels or Glasgow or elsewhere when it's hosted in European cities because of issues of mobility and vaccine equity between the two continents. And I'm not saying there are no young people there, but how many are young Africans who cross the Mediterranean to be there and have a decision-making power? And as we're going into African COP, the COP27 in Egypt, my appeal is to decolonize your approach, support Africa-led efforts, and fund young Africans to be in COP as part of your delegation, so they can have access to negotiations and not be there just as the activist who sits on panel or protests in the street. 2, on the issue of leadership, the issue of leadership on the continent is generational, just like the issue of development is colonial. 64 is the average age of African leaders, and 20 is the average age of Africa's population. If we want strategies to reinforce African and European youth leadership, we need to move into what I call intergenerational co-leadership. There are commendable initiatives on climate that engage young people, but mostly Europe is the host, the owner, and the donor of these initiatives. And young Africans are just invited to participate. I don't think young people are asking for participation anymore. They're asking for co-leadership, co-creation, co-designing the decisions, and resources to implement those decisions. So why don't we enforce a 35% to be youth institutionalized in the negotiation rooms in every COP and every AU summit? And that was our recommendation yesterday in our event as NALA, Feminist Collective. And then my final comment is on the Green Deal. Some called AU green intervention in Africa also a green colonialism. And honestly, as an African, I ask, what does the Green Deal mean for Africa? Because it looks like the Green Deal is pretending to save the climate while it's actually saving the European economy. As now it moved from green transition, we're talking about green recovery. And since the European EVP for Green Deal is with us, I'm glad you mentioned electricity. I'd like to hear your thoughts on President Macky Sall's concern over natural gas. Europe knows natural gas is needed, yet doesn't want African countries to produce that gas. And as you said, even though Africa accounts for only 3% of the world's carbon emissions, so is Europe imposing foreign policy at the expense of Africa's own development aspiration? I think African youth would be really interested to hear your thoughts on that, Mr. Timmermans. Thank you.
Aya, wow, what a powerful set of statements. And I can see that, on the chat, you sent the chat whizzing, and you powerfully conveyed some of the points that are really very kind of cutting if I may say, to the heart of some of the relationship issues. On your last point, very briefly, because I have a number of speakers to get to, but you've made a very powerful gong there, is the thing about gas. Let's turn backwards from that. We know that gas is bad. And we know that the Commission has said there are some elements of energy that have to continue as a part of the transition. What would you like as an alternative? Because you know that if you go down the pathway of gas, there may be some very powerful consequences for the continent. Is there not an alternative way? I know you're not an expert on this, but you're asking, do you have an alternative solution? Is it just to let Africa get on with gas?
Yeah, but again, Africa accounts for 3% of the world's carbon emissions. So let's not pretend that Africa is the problem here. Instead of challenging Africa over its development priorities, Europe should be accountable to its historical contribution to global warming pollution. Okay. And if Europe actually reaches the ambition targets put for itself, I think the problem would be solved. But the question is, will Europe reach the targets?
Okay, I'm sure, colleagues, those of you who are, active, please do react to what you've heard. Disagree, have alternatives, have recommendations, because we document all that you're saying on the Zoom chat, and it's important, and we'll play that back both to leaders into the Africa EU summit next week, but also for posterity in terms of actions. So I do encourage you to use the Zoom chat, and if you do want to come in, use your virtual hand and raise it so that my colleagues can alert me to who I can bring in. I'm going to move directly to a powerful opening. I'm going to go to Nathan. Nathan, you're a climate justice advocate, and you've just been, you've been at the Milan Youth COP. Tell us from your perspective, how did it go? Did it feel like a different deal in terms of youth engagement?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm part of the UNSG Youth Advisory Board. We're 7 from different continents. One of them is Nisrin El-Saim in Sudan, a very powerful African voice as well. I guess what I will say will be a lot of an add-on to what Aya said, but maybe also there will be criticism as well on what I will say. I think, first of all, what is super important to say is that at the Youth Pre-COP 26, at the COP 26, at the COI, which is the Conference on Youth before COP 26, and for years and years of events, what we've been asking for is not to move and to be stronger together for climate action, but it's to be stronger together for climate justice. And this is a very different thing, because of course you can try to reduce your CO2 emissions, your greenhouse gas emissions in all the ways you want. But if you don't do it in a way that supports the most marginalized and the most impacted, then you're reproducing inequalities. And this is really key at the work that youth movements have been doing for the past years of calling leaders to work more on climate justice. And this is something, of course, that has not been done so much. And the European Green Deal is a good example where at the very beginning in 2019, the Just Transition Fund that was created to support those who need most than anyone else to transition was cut completely. But 3 very important things, I think, for this conversation here that comes from the Youth Pre-COP and the COI as well. First of all, is the importance to abolish the fossil fuel industry by 2030. It was a very big demand of the Youth Pre-COP. And yet at COP26, the biggest delegation was the fossil fuel industry's representatives. And it's also them who had the most meeting and access to policymakers. But maybe moving a little bit more to Africa, I really agree with what Aya said. And I think actually when you look at the climate finance, we always talk about this 100 billion commitment where developed countries provide funding to the global south to support their action, to mitigation, to support them to adapt to the effects of the climate crisis. When you look at this 100 billion, stakeholders and states like the EU and the US says that actually we're not so far from the 100 billion commitment. But when you look at what is inside the 60 or 70, depending on the numbers, the 60 or 70% that is actually achieved every year, it's a lot of loans that increase the debts of the African countries and other developing countries. It's a lot of private finance. It's a lot of bilateral agreements between states like France, Germany, that can maintain some colonial power relationship with some parts of the continent. And actually, there's only a third that's actually given in grants. And when you give it in grants, there are still strings attached. There's still a lot of reporting to do. And I think this is a very, very big issue. And we need to talk more about how climate finance is maintaining colonial power relationship between the global north, developed countries, and the global south, if it means anything, developing countries. Another thing which is really important is, of course, and we've seen it with the COVID, is when it comes to, being a bit loose on the brevet for the COVID vaccine to allow other countries to create this vaccine. Suddenly, this is, going to threaten intelligence and kind of knowledge that has been built in the global north. And it's the same with the climate crisis, where we need also technologies to be given and transferred through capacity building to countries that need it the most, without reproducing again colonial relationship. And this is true for Europe, for Africa, it's true for almost everywhere in the world. But last, and I will come back to what Aya was saying, the question of moving from just being invited and just being heard to actually being in a, and I used what you said, the co-leadership position. And I think for this, again, it needs funding. And it needs funding for everything that young people do, because always the youth organization, the youth movements, the youth communities everywhere in the world, and we're so many, are struggling for anything they're doing. And this is something that really needs to be fixed for COP27. At COP27, there will be a study that will be made on how much is going to youth movements everywhere in the world, from philanthropy, from other sources, and we really hope that that can be scaled up. And again, don't do it in the same way than the climate finance issue. Make sure that this is given through grants with not too many strings attached.
Nathan,
thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Things for you to reflect on is that how do you ensure that the money gets to the right hands and reaches the parts it needs to? We know corruption, which is not unique to Africa, is a major issue. And so are there creative solutions in which how young people could actually increase accountability by their involvement of making sure the money gets to where it needs to be? It's a major issue, but also grants have to have some strings attached, as you know. But how do you make sure there's some sort of co-production about the accountabilities and responsibilities of making that money work in the way it should do? And I think that we could all describe the nature of the problem, and what would be interesting to hear is that what kind of creative solutions could there be of young people being involved in increasing the accountability and making sure that the money reaches the parts it can with their leaders, and what are the ways in which you can do that? I'm going to go now. Thank you very much, Nathan. I'm going to go to two members of the Stronger Together focus group, the video that you saw, and the first one I'm really pleased to invite Kaylee. Are you there?
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you?
Thank you very much for joining us. So,
thanks for having me.
No, so you've been global change biology researcher at Stellenbosch University. Give us your sense of the issues that you're hearing from your perspective. I mean, we've heard a lot. Okay, we've had the video, we've had the comments. What's your particular entry point into this?
My particular entry point is that this is a very vast dialogue, and when we are talking about policy and involving youth in policy discussions, there are many different areas in which policy needs to be applied. What we were speaking about in the focus groups that were organized by the Africa-Europe Foundation was essentially how can we be supported, and why is it important that youth are at policy discussions? And the most important point that I want to get across today is the fact that not even just talking about large-scale policies for things like energy production, we're talking about the fact that in Africa, the majority of local adaptation to damages incurred by climate change is enacted by local communities. And that those actions are based off of indigenous knowledge and traditional ways of dealing with climate issues. So young people that are involved in the climate crisis in Africa in the fields of research and the arts and entrepreneurship do not necessarily have the frameworks necessary to get our knowledge from our specific fields out, communicated to the public, to communities, to be able to know what needs to happen. The reason that I think it's important that youth are at policy dialogues and present in these discussions is that, like you said, Africa is one of the youngest continents, and the youth make up the fabric of society on which policies are going to be acting, as well as the fact that we are the main instigators of change. It's our businesses that are impacted. It is our communities that are going to need to adapt. And we are the people that actually can inform what policies need to be put into place. So, for example, as a young researcher, I'm researching the impact of climate change on species distributions in South Africa. It's one of the first studies of its kind in Africa. And that is unacceptable. The fact that we have the majority of the data telling us what's going to happen in terms of climate change being predictive models and not from evidence-based approaches is something that needs help in order to fix. It needs policy to guide it, and it needs funding. It's very difficult to sit here as a researcher and not say that South Africans or African researchers need funding when it's very blatantly obvious in reports from saying that like 0.51% of GDP in sub-Saharan Africa goes to research. I think it's important, like what you're saying, how do we ensure, or what creative ways do we ensure accountability of where money goes? It's because youth needs to be at the table saying what we see as the most important places for action and for focus and funding.
So Kylie, can I interrupt you for a second? Sorry to cut across you. What specifically would you like? So giving your example just now, what you're researching currently sounds very powerful and potential and potent in terms of its utility for future impact and research. You know that their universities are linked globally and across the piece. What would you like to see happen if you were to, I know I'm putting you on the spot, very briefly.
Well, what I'd like to see happen is the framework and the infrastructure for observations of climatic impact on ecosystems to be built in Africa, and not in a way that is cooperative with the needs of African countries as viewed from youth. Additionally, networks of communication between researchers, entrepreneurs, and artists to communities to communicate what needs to be done and what impacts are going to be had. It has been proven that when people are informed about the changes that are going to occur, they are more likely to react. So essentially, it's hard to say anything other than funding, but as well as the establishment of communication networks, I think that would help.
Thank you. But I think there's a great opportunity to do more in terms of linking universities and around the work you do. I'm going to move to Shogui, who is Public Leadership Program Manager at the PLACE Network, Sudan, France. One of the young leaders, I have to read this, as a young leader and change maker for African diaspora and refugees. A lot you're doing, and you're also involved in the African Europe Foundation. So thank you very much for joining us. It's good to have you with us. Share your thoughts. I mean, there's a lot that's been said. But if I can encourage all the contributors, try and focus on what we should do and must do, as opposed to diagnosing the problem, because we know what the problem is, and we spend hours visually, literally, on this matter. But what would you like to see happen, Shogui? And very warm welcome.
Hello. Definitely, thank you so much. Basically, I'm just heading to the main point that I would love to highlight here is the process of co-creation, how we define this methodology in general. I had the chance to be part of in 2017 also in the EU YPII, which is the Youth Flag Initiative, which is the first initiative that has included youth from both continents and working. I think we had almost more than 50 days together in Brussels, in Abidjan, and in Addis Ababa. And throughout this process, we had the chance to interact, of course, with lots of decision making. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, it was not that easy, of course, to enforce and to mainstream the importance of the youth. But having such interaction today, it showcased to me that there is a lot of maturity happening around this topic where we're able to speak about it. So I'm really, really happy about that. Coming back to the point of co-creation and mainstreaming topics in a similar level, what has happened so far is that we are inventing the table. We are creating a table. However, the table has not this amount, the adequate amount of shares that includes everyone. in order for us to hear the voices of youth. We're speaking about the issues. We are highlighting the issues, especially when it comes to the climate change, and a wonderful video that I think it showcased the importance of leadership, importance of funding, and many other aspects of it. However, how do we see things happening together? I think this is the major issue. And as much as there is a lot of talks happening around it in many different aspects, there was, of course, Khalid is speaking about the research main element. There is Nathan was speaking about collaboration between youth themselves in different parts of the world. But how do we see this happening? I feel this is the highest thing that we have to highlight. How will it look like? It has to be about increasing the number of shares. It has to be about adapting to the needs of the youth. And I'm not saying here that you have just to let them there be and to be tokenized, meaning like, okay, what do you think? Is it blue or red jacket? I don't know if you know this concept, but is it blue or red? No, let them know. I need a purple jacket. I need pink jacket. I need to hear for my own needs as an African, as an European youth. And until we be able to reach this, I don't think that it makes sense to put all this obligation on youth and make sure that always we're like, oh, we're highlighted as part of the issue without making a seat for us in the table.
Great, thank you for being succinct. And this is this is for everyone who's contributing, especially young people. That point about, most of you who've come here today, and I'm making a generalism here, come from a particular background, have had access to means potentially, and have the opportunity. What do you do about the vast majority of populations, both in Europe, but this is about Europe as well, and in Africa, where you don't have the means or the opportunity, even the aspiration, because as Fran said, you're thinking about next week, next month, and actually you're thinking about things which it's like, life's too difficult, I'm going to focus on what I have to think about in terms of my livelihood. How do we actually engage that community and that group? And if you have ideas, or if you're doing that, please post it on so people can see actually what's happening in those terms. I'm going to go back to Franz. Franz, if I can bring you back.
I'm here.
Hello. So some very powerful statements there, and obviously I know that you weren't shy from responding to some of the very sharp comments made, but and you've commented on this before in this auditorium. So over to you to react to what you've heard from especially I and others around the relationship, the engagement, and the meaningfulness of youth involvement in co-production of decision making and policy engagement.
Well, first of all, I think I probably misunderstood me when I talked about colonizing the future. I used the image of colonizing the future to point to the need to change our behavior so that we don't colonize the future. And I think David van Rijbroek has used a very powerful image to convey what we're actually doing right now. We're acting as though we had 2 or 3 planets to live on, which we don't have. So the message I'm trying to convey is we need to learn to live within planetary boundaries, and that is the main objective of our climate policy today. And of not just saying we want to be carbon neutral, but climate neutral. Secondly, Africa's energy needs are massive. If 600 million people still have no access to electricity, and only a very few number of African countries have access to natural gas, and if they believe this is the best way for them to grant access of their population to energy, and they want to make investments in there, we're not going to oppose that at all. But we do believe that solar energy, certainly for a continent as Africa, is the cheapest and most, I would say, democratic way of you don't need big grids. You can bring it to every single village. You can make people owners of their own energy resourcing as a community. So we're just saying that choosing an option of renewable energy, given the natural circumstances in Africa, seems to be the smarter choice. But some countries will choose to invest in natural gas, just like some European countries choose to invest in natural gas. And I think Africa will be a huge part of an enormous energy opportunity for the future, which is green hydrogen, which, if you combine the natural circumstances of Africa with the ease with which you can produce enormous amounts of energy through solar energy, and then store that energy in hydrogen, and then market that hydrogen on a world market, you have an enormous opportunity, and you will create interrelationships between Europe and Africa that will last for generations and generations to the benefit of both continents. So I want to be very clear on that. That is, I believe, the way we should look at these investments. And I see, you know, I'm going to have another meeting with the incoming president of the COP later today. I see huge interest in many African countries in developing these ideas on renewable energy, like hydrogen. So you know, it comes down to the choices Africa will make for itself. Nothing against natural gas. I just wonder whether that's always the smartest choice, given the fact that only a few African countries have access to it. And you know, if you look at the program we have, for instance, developing now with South Africa, which is a country that has huge resources of coal, but also understands that that's not the future and that's creating more problems than it's solving. That transition, and we want to be part of that transition, is going to be an exciting journey to follow, but also something we need to do. And we're certainly trying to mobilize globally enough funds to make it happen. And then, you know, that might also be a template for other energy transitions elsewhere in Africa and across the world. So, you know, I just wanted to clarify these points because it is not my intention to come and lecture. It is our intention to listen and to see where we can cooperate. And I want to repeat the point, and I will keep banging on about this. We're not just talking with people who have an interest in this. We also need to talk with people who don't feel connected to this, and who are very worried about the future and who need to be part of the conversation as well.
Indeed, Frans, thank you very much. And, you know, as ever, some of these things are lost in communication. And I think that, you know, it's about, you know, it is a loaded, heavily contextualized relationship between Africa and Europe. And we know the history. And, you know, it'll always be that reminder in the background of what has happened in the past. But I suppose everyone wants to move in the right direction. And some of these choices, as you say, are perhaps lost in the options or the discussions that are being put forward. And I think that's where you have an opportunity. We will have an opportunity to actually directly go to young people to engage in some of these options. I'm going to go and thank you very much, and please do stay on, friends, and we'll come back to you. I'm going to go back to someone who is a historical figure of our times. First ever woman president of Ireland, co-chair of our Africa-Europe Foundation. Mary, very pleased to have you with us again. Hello.
Hello, yes.
Good to have you with us. You're a, you know, global climate action champion. You know, you're a leader. You're part of the, you know, people that are the elders group, etc. You have a lot of know-how and experience, and you've been through this, these issues of young people involvement always. Actually, what occurs to me is, from my experience, that we repeat the same issues and we hear the same noises around youth engagement. From your perspective, how do we buck the trend as we're thinking as we move towards the next COP? Because, you know, you have a lot of insight, and you've seen what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past from your own, you know, political experiences as well. Over to you, Mary.
Well, I think we really have to listen to people like Aya and Nathan and others when they talk about co-leadership, co-creation, that they want the responsibility of being part of the decision making because they know they have a contribution to make that will make better decisions. And they, you know, are increasingly saying we need to be not just, you know, at the table to be allowed to speak for a little bit and then told to go away, or the decision is taken elsewhere. They have to be where the decisions are taken. We need to take that on board. We also need to take on board the idea of not trying to have European solutions for Africa. I'm co-host with Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf of the Women Leaders Network of the Africa-Europe Foundation. And we've spent the last year meeting quite often, meeting almost monthly. And we met last month, and we'll meet this week. Now, we're listening to our African sisters, those of us from Europe. We know that some African countries need gas, but we see gas as being a transition for those countries. And we want to see a planning for transition out of gas at the very beginning of the transition in, so that it's clear that those countries will then have the base load to be able to move to clean energy. You know, industrialized countries, we never tried to build our economies on clean energy. You can't do it from scratch in many countries.
Indeed.
You've got to have some basis. So listening and then taking on board what is being said is very fundamental. The Women Leaders Network have decided this year to focus in going forward to COP27 on 3 issues. On access to energy, and that means access to gas as a transition energy, both for industrialized reasons and for home, for cooking solutions, for health, for education, etc. Secondly, the commitment in COP to double climate finance, but there's no plan at the moment, no plan at all. It's going to, and to double it by 2025. It's going to be very difficult for countries to double their climate finance, their climate adaptation finance. If there isn't a plan for it, it will be like the 100 billion. It will string out and erode trust. And then the third issue that we're going to deal with is loss and damage, because we were very disappointed in Glasgow at the way that the US, with support from the European Union, killed the idea of a finance facility, a Glasgow finance facility. And we want serious discussion leading to COP27 of how we're going to have that funding, that serious funding for loss and damage, because that's where a lot of small island states and parts of Africa and other countries are, because they haven't the insurance, they haven't the resilience to cope with the overwhelming way in which they're having hurricanes, having floods, having severe drought, etc. And as Vanessa Nakate, a good friend, says, you cannot adapt to extinction. So we're into loss and damage now, and European countries and the rest of the industrialized world has to realize that before COP27.
Mary, thank you so much. What will be helpful, I think, for everyone, because we've got hundreds of people engaged here. You've set out a 3-point plan for, making the next COP more effective, and you were disappointed with the fact that the financial facility didn't go ahead. What do you need? Why don't you put something on the chat? We'll help you do that, so that some of the young people who are interested in finance and want to see a different kind of approach to climate finance engage and support you and this, as you say, the Women Leaders Network and others that you're working with, so that we can ratchet up the ante on it. And make sure that there's a bit of a noise around it. What you didn't say,
the UK presidency of COP26, to their credit, put a lot of muscle behind the 100 billion. They didn't quite get there, but they had a plan, they had a direction. There doesn't seem to be anything for adaptation finance, which has to be doubled by 2025. At the moment, it's just words.
Indeed.
And it's very serious that we don't have words in such an important area like adaptation finance, because it will erode trust. So I would put that top of the agenda if I was Frans Timmermans.
No, indeed, I agree with you. And the one thing you did, I'm not going to call you back, but to all of you, none of you have mentioned digitalization and the impact of digitalization on the continent. When we think about the number of satellites that are going up from the billionaires in the States, it's going to be the one fastest solution on climate, accessibility, access to all means and manner of life. But no one has raised the issue of, what would you do about satellites and telecommunications and making sure that, every young person and other people across Africa have the same chances as the people in the rest of the world, because of the development around digitalization and digital infrastructure, which we're not talking about here today. But on that point, let me just move to let's move to passing the baton from the last COP to the next one. I'm really pleased to welcome Nigel Topping here. Nigel, welcome to you.
Hi there, hi everybody, great to join you.
So you are in this. You've been the kind of captaineering the last COP in Glasgow. Share with us some of the priorities that have emerged for you, and how do you make sure that we've heard from Mary saying there are certain things that just didn't happen. What would you like to pass on? What do you think are the key issues, and also making sure the next COP is even more inclusive?
Well, first of all, of course, I'm still in the role, because the role of high-level champion goes for 2 COPs. So I worked with Gonzalo Munoz, the high-level champion appointed by the Chilean government, and I'm waiting with bated breath for the Egyptian presidency to appoint their high-level champion, and I work with him or her on the non-state actor agenda to COP27. I think one of the first things I say, these kind of conversations are really important. I mean, I've been incredibly helped and influenced by these kinds of conversations and by the young people in our team. Somebody mentioned a benchmark of 35%. I've just checked, we have 38% young people in our team, helped by our youth fellowship program, which we're going to increase significantly this year, which is 80% of the youth fellows in the Global South. So I think we'll be over 40% by the end of the year. I think it's it's important for me to remember that Glasgow was, there's two things that were true about Glasgow. It was an overwhelming success and a complete failure at the same time. And it depends on the perspective you take. So from the perspective of the progress year on year, it over-delivered in terms of ambition and in terms of urgency. But in terms of the snapshot of where we're at, in terms of a trajectory, we know we're far behind. So the key thing for COP27 is to build on where we've got momentum, like a greater sense of urgency, a ratcheting of the ambition. COP25, we didn't agree 1.5 as the collective goal, or we're still arguing about that, right? So that's a huge step forward. COP25, we didn't agree to ratchet every year. We were still on a 5-year cycle. So there's huge steps forward in terms of the sense of urgency, the respect of the science, the momentum on public and private collaboration on developing the technologies, the clean technologies at the low cost, so that that technology transfer happens easily. You know, the Glasgow breakthroughs is based around that whole idea that by 2030, all of the technologies covered by that need to be available to everybody at the competitive price. But there's huge amounts of work to be done. For me, there's 3 things to be done. One is all those promises made in Glasgow have to be delivered, and everybody's skeptical because there's been many promises in the past that haven't all been met. So there's a real emphasis on delivery of what's been committed. But we have very clear pathways in sector after sector on what needs to be done. And we're seeing money flow into green hydrogen. I was in Egypt recently, the first green hydrogen electrolysis and green ammonia projects are starting to happen. They're taking advantage of that amazing natural resource. Secondly, we've got to mobilize the finance. And Mary and others have mentioned 100 billion, but the 100 billion, is a commitment made by the rich countries to the developing and least developed countries. But it's not the solution on its own. It's part of the solution. We need trillions of dollars to flow. And that's what I'm really excited to hear. The beginning we have to have the grown-up conversation about why that money isn't flowing. Because even if you have enough public money, if you don't have the right conditions, then you won't get the trillion. So if you have corruption, if you don't have the right policies, if you don't have strong enough institutions, then private finance will be too expensive and it won't flow. So we need work from the multilateral institutions to focus more on leveraging and creating the conditions to de-risk, to bring in more finance. We need work from all governments to create the policy environments, and we need work from those 450 financial institutions that created GFANs. And then I think we've got to get much more specific on resilience. Mary, you talk about the fund. There's lots of different solutions we need to address risk pooling. If it's, when I was in the Caribbean last year, the particular issue there is when you have a catastrophic event which wipes out, creates a loss of the order of magnitude of the GDP of the country, if your multilateral loans don't give you an immediate relief through what they call a catastrophe clause, then you're automatically massively more indebted. So there's technical solutions needed there. There's insurance solutions needed in areas where there's very little coverage. Insurance is one of the bedrocks of development because it removes volatility of income, and there's some great work being done by the Insure Resilience Coalition, and we need better infrastructure better investment in infrastructure so that the damage that is already happening is less. So I think those are 2 things. We've got to deliver on the commitments and keep ratcheting them. We've got to mobilize finance, and GFANS is very focused on how do we mobilize more private finance in emerging and developing markets. And we've got to get more specific about the solutions for resilience, loss and damage, and not think that there's one solution which will address the very complex needs of all the vulnerable communities around the world. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully going out to Egypt in another week or 2 to meet the soon-to-be appointed champion and get on with that work.
But on that note, thank you, Nigel, for being with us again. Last year we spoke to you just before, obviously, Glasgow. So well done and congratulations. But obviously, as you said, it was, depending on perspective, either a success or a failure. But we can't lose hope. We can't afford to lose hope. Let's move to Egypt, in fact. We have with us an MP from Egypt, which is Amira. Very warm welcome to you, Amira.
Welcome, everyone. And I would be much looking forward to receive you all in Egypt next year. We are very happy and excited to have COP being in Egypt for several reasons, actually. The first of them is the sound of the Global South. It's time for the Global South to manifest and to talk and to have their voices highly heard.
Thank you, Amira. How are you going to, so, we've heard lots, and I'm not asking you to reveal your plans now, you're preparing, but How are you going to make sure, we've heard so much frustration about the lack of youth involvement, the sense of a Eurocentricity around global action on climate. How are you going to make COP, and this is a huge responsibility, very different but made in Africa? How will you make it the hallmarks of one of the first made in Africa, which will actually set a different tone for how you do things around climate action, which I know is a hard question.
It is a hard question, and actually I can say that I'm wearing different hats and different glasses now. Being one of the youth, I'm representing them, being a member of the Egyptian Parliament and the Secretary General of the Foreign Relations Committee. So all of that, and also besides attending the last COP at Glasgow, it gives me very deep insights on how it is going. Actually, first of all, the problem which everyone is living in now is created from mainly the global north, and this historical responsibility should be leading the table either for negotiations and for anything else which is coming. Talking about my own country, Egypt, we are going to welcome you all to Sharm el-Sheikh, a very beautiful city which its coral reefs and its ecosystem is highly endangered due to climate change. So we are not talking about something which we don't touch, we are touching. Our generation has been into this. Our generation has been feeling and living the dramatic and the drastic consequences of climate change. So it's like now, like never before, it's the rights of the youth to lead the discussions and to be on every single table, either the table of decision-making, the table of negotiations, and also driving and drawing the policies of the future. So regarding Egypt, we are on the tip of our toes, everyone, either the government or the civil society, or even the private sector. We have very high hopes, despite we have very low contribution to the global emissions, but our plans, the Ministry of Planning has actually set like 35% of all the national projects are going to be green projects, and for next year we aim to reach 50% of it. That's besides the running and the frequent meetings which have been held in Egypt between the British group and between the Egyptian group. Me, myself, we have approached it in the Foreign Relations Committee, the British group at the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and we are starting a very fruitful conversation on the road from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh. I'm very hopeful because it's time for the global south, especially Africa, to have its voice heard loudly. I attended Glasgow last year and I was very sad to find that there were two zones actually. An exhibition zone where everything important, negotiations are taking place, and the zone where youth and innovators and entrepreneurs weren't on the same place. They were like 15 minutes apart. This actually wasn't the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that youth, innovators, entrepreneurs should be, civil society representatives should be the heart of the talk. I'm talking about my generation and the generation that are coming, and for that, it's about finance, it's about adaptation. And my view to adaptation plans is that they should come from national drivers. Yes, the global north should commit to their commitments. We didn't see the 100 billion commitments being met at all. We are far from meeting most of these targets. And this is why the upcoming COP is very crucial to reach consensus, to have the voices of the youth heard and their representation in the heart of every single decision-making process.
Thank you. Amira, it's, you brilliant words, absolutely, and you can tell, for the passion of what you said, and, you're on record now. Let's hope that you, together with your fellow parliamentarians and others, in the appointment of the next, lead for the COP, are able to provide a different tone and a different starting point, and actually restructure it. As I said, made in Africa, make it sing in that way that you want it to, but also put, where, the commitment is in practice in terms of women, young people, inclusivity, but also the big guns of let's say, I unfortunately use the phrase guns, but security people, private sector, etc. But make it what you and these people here would like it to be, which is a different kind of story and narrative of changing the habit of COP. And on that note, I'm going to bring you a colleague of yours, the Ambassador Saad, ambassador from Egypt. Hello. A very warm welcome to you, Ambassador Saad. You're on mute. I need you to unmute. Hello, very brief comment from you because I'm running out of time, but I'm happy to take you.
Very brief, for ambassadors it's not easy to be brief, but nevertheless, I would like to well, thank you very much, and I really congratulate you for such a very interesting webinar, particularly with the very good contributions by the youth who are practicing their rights to ensure a safe life for them and for the next generations. And I would like to assure them that a good position and location and opportunity will be granted, before the COP27, and to ensure that their voice, their contributions, their opinion will be heard and listened to in the COP27. I would not get into the very technical details, but let me first apologize on behalf of Minister Yasmin Fuad, who was preparing to attend, but a sudden commitment came and prevented her. So she asked me to replace her. I'll try, but let me just very quickly and very directly put the following points. One is Egypt is working very actively in order to ensure the proper organization of the conference, to ensure the facilities and everything that would ensure the success of the conference with the huge number of participants, which could reach 30,000 persons. Second is our plan and our ambition that we should not have a COP27 kind of repetition of prolonged negotiations that have revealed all declared and undeclared, positions of different parties. We are really determined in order to mobilize all the efforts in order to ensure that we will move to a serious track to get from statements and commitments to implementation. Okay. So it should be very much clear that we cannot have such a big conference just to have a kind of repetitive scenarios. Second is Egypt is holding this conference on behalf of the African countries. And that's why, it should be very clear, and we have been informing the whole international community that the African priorities should have the right place where they deserve, this conference, not simply because for political reasons, but clearly because Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents to climate change implications. They have, I think that their contribution in emissions does not exceed 4%.
No, indeed. And Ambassador, I'm sorry, and I'm being rude. I do apologize, but I'm running out of time. And as you said, the points you're making have been well echoed, and it's really good to have you with us. What would be good to hear from you is, and I do apologize, is that what's your offer to these young people that are in this virtual audience? How will you make it different in terms of their engagement for the next COP?
Well, our plan is to have a forum for the youth. And that will have to be organized very properly and have a kind of agenda and an opportunity in order to have their own meetings and to take whatever recommendations to be conveyed to the conference. This is should come within a kind of democratic interaction in order to ensure, that the youth, who are, as I said, are practicing the rights to defend their lives, their future generation.
Indeed.
So that's what we are preparing for.
Okay.
And,
thank you. And I'm sorry again, because I want to go to the young people who've been really patient. We've had loads of hands up, and I've not been able to take them, so I want to move to them. But I was keen to take you, Ambassador, as you are, as you are going to be one of the politicians involved. Go on. You're going to come back. But you're on mute, Ambassador. Yeah, I'm sorry. I do apologize, but I'm going to have to move on. Hopefully, someone can put something on the chat from yourself in response to what I'm saying. I want to move on, and obviously, both of you, Amira and yourself, lots of best wishes and good spirits to you in terms of making it a Made in Africa COP. Let's look forward to that. I'm going to move on to now Jakub. You have had your hand up for donkey's ages. I'm sorry. Hello.
Thank you. No problem. Hello.
Hello. As I said, I want to get as many of you as I can. So I'm going to be more brutal, I'm afraid, because I've only got 21 minutes left. And so I want the politicians to come back to what you hear. So briefly, over to you.
Okay, I'll also try to keep it short as possible. I represent both sides, the scientific side, and I'm also involved at the university. But on the other hand, I work in a company that supplies the community with electricity. And as a young person, I find it very useful that I got to know a lot of mechanisms that control and design the energy sector. And unfortunately, it is easy for us to just talk about abandoning fossil fuels, but the entire sector cannot switch overnight to alternative sources. It is just impossible. The infrastructure is not ready yet. Of course, I've noticed a huge boom in the development of RES solutions, and such a change requires proper planning, of course. And in addition, I'm in a team which is developing the very first hydrogen buffer in Poland, aimed at balancing the energy distribution in power grid. But I see so many threats, such as lack of good policies, and costs on the other hand. Unfortunately, many people who are not involved in such activities on everyday basis say that we have to change something to reduce emissions, but the safety of each country, for example, in Europe, among other things, of course, depends on the energy quality, and the energy market must make this change in small steps.
Indeed.
It's not possible to make a huge step forward.
Sure.
Just
so if I cut across, you're saying there's an important value, what Mary and others said, to adaptation and getting adaptation right. And not, you need to a little bit, my words, not anybody else's, a little bit dirty to get very clean. And so you're going to, in the transition process, you're going to have to adapt in ways. What would you like from the next COP? Just very simply, what do you want?
I would like to get some new policies or maybe tips how to implement new types of RES technology. For example, hydrogen.
Okay. All right, very specific, put it on. Those of you who are, we've got a vast community out there, respond to what you heard. And I also wonder if there's anyone in the private sector virtually on screen, please don't hesitate to come in, because we've not spoken very much about the role of the private sector. I know that I can see a Vodafone rep somewhere in the audience, so if they're prepared to come in, I'll bring you in. I want to go to Moses. Hello, Moses. Very warm welcome. You're on mute, Moses. You have no audio? Can't hear you.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
A very warm welcome to you.
Yeah, very welcome to you. Thank you for this opportunity as well. And I want to make this contribution concerning what Vice President Timmermans said. He said something about green energy, and I think I share his aspirations towards that field. But what I want to understand is more of the carbon adjustment mechanism system that's been used by Europe. I think that mechanism, we have to delve into it much longer. I think Africa has also got to adapt something similar to that, so that it will regulate its carbon emissions and to meet the global target. And I think Africa is also doing a good job, maintaining the emissions to a lower level than Europe is doing.
Indeed. Indeed. So you'd like, you'd like more engagement and information around carbon, adjustment mechanisms and how they can, I suppose, homegrown solutions. Yeah. Okay. And where are you currently, Moses? Whereabouts are you right now?
Okay, I'm in Ghana.
In Ghana. Very warm welcome to you from Ghana. Looks lovely. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. I'm going to go to Anna. Again, Anna, thank you for being so patient. Do introduce yourself and where you are. Hello.
If I understand, I'm the Anna, right?
Sorry, of course. What a failure of my moderation. Just say, there's 10 Annas in the audience. Anna Mamadova. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Anna, and I'm here on behalf of the Human Rights and Minority Rights Organization. Mm-hmm. It's called Global Human Rights Defense, and we're based in the Netherlands, in The Hague. And my question for, I would say primarily for Commissioner Timmermans and for the Africa Youth Commissioner Aya Chebi would be with regards to steering away from the talks about the energy transition and instead discussing the approach of starting to decolonize every current and future climate deal in order to ensure that we end neocolonialism and we end neocolonialism, especially in the light of climate change, and perhaps make it a discussion in the next COP in Egypt.
Great, thank you very much. And let's hope there is a different tone and atmosphere around the next one. I'm going to now go to Oshirime. Have I got it right?
Yeah, it's Oshoriame.
Oshoriame. Thank you, my apologies. Tell us whereabouts are you, and tell us what you want from this next process in terms of youth engagement or any issue.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Oshoriame from Nigeria. And first, I want to point out to what you said initially when you talked about how can we account for corruption and how can we reduce corruption. I want to say that technology has made it a lot easier for us.
Indeed.
That we can be transparent with technology. Mm. Also, when Aya Chaba was saying something, she said we should learn to decolonize that relationship and create a balance between the then generation and now generation. I want to point out that for us to achieve the 2030 goal and to make our environment safe for us to live, there is need for us to focus on education, because in Nigeria, where I live, a lot of people are not concerned about their environment. They are not concerned about these goals. They feel that these people should do them for themselves. They are not conscious of what we should do. They think it's for a particular set of people. So I believe that awareness and education should be part of our topmost priority in order for us to get these goals that we want to achieve.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, go on. Finish your sentence. I'm being very rude. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to say that in the next COP, I expect more emphasis on education and awareness, and
indeed,
as much as we focus on other important aspects too.
Indeed, and I think thank you for joining us. And as I suppose it was a point that Franz was making earlier about how do you make sure those who do not see this as a priority, because actually their lives are such that it feels like a luxury to think about the climate. But Nigeria and other states have the most burgeoning fashion industry, have the most incredible art scene and popular culture. So there's some lessons here which we haven't talked about. Is that how does popular culture become a conveyor to engage those people who are not interested in climate to become interested in climate? So views on that, please post them. I'm going to Fatima. I believe there's only one Fatima on screen, so I don't have your surname, so I do apologize in advance.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, everyone.
Hello. Introduce yourself, sorry, please, and your question or issue.
My contribution to this, the Africa Foundation, Europe Africa Foundation, is regarding historical injustices. And I think that Egypt, if they are the country that will host COP27, the next COP27, that they should make space to address historical injustice.
Uh-huh.
Due to the fact that I do not believe the African countries should be paying for any of what's happening right now. I think we have paid enough historically, and we have never spoke about reparations with any European nation. And it seems to be a subject that often disappears from this context and should be addressed, because we know that the lack of development, it's due to historical injustices, and it's directly and the influence of climate change has everything to do with the fact that countries have not undergone the same development.
Indeed.
So I really think it's not just finance, it's not just about what we can do. I think we all must do something, but there are certain countries that should not be paying for this, and I think African countries should not be paying for climate change.
Very well said. Perhaps there's a kind of an element that you've got a captive audience here. You've got Amira and Ambassador Saad listening. So I hope they'll engage in this audience to actually make it the thing. As I keep on saying, it should be a made in Africa opportunity for a COP that actually signals a very different tone and approach. I'm running out of time, colleagues, and I have less than 10 minutes. So my apologies to all of you who are on the chat. We'll come back to you and we'll try and make those connections also. We commit to that, I promise you. I want to go to Lucy, who's been very patient, is one of the contributors I want to bring in from the African Conservation Centre. You're the executive director there. Lucy, please come in and very briefly respond to what you've heard in, I suppose, in less than 2 minutes, if you can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity. Indeed, I can say a few highlights in 2 minutes, which will be around 2 points. One is that from everything we are saying, I think we need to prioritize youth engagement in the climate action value chain. This is the best way I feel I can describe the different components of climate action. And if we thought of climate action as a whole value chain, from delegates who attend, to negotiators who are on the table, to those who push proposals for action, to the implementation that goes on in countries, we need the youth engaged across the whole climate action value chain. And central to that is leadership. I think we've had great activism from youth and great advocacy by youth, but it's time we move from activism to action and give them the space where they can actually put to action a lot of what they believe in their hearts and are passionate about and are willing, in many cases, to die for. I think we have heard them, but we have not translated what we are hearing into enabling them to be active players in the action space. And that starts from how much leverage we give them in our own institutions, whether locally, nationally, continentally, and even globally. Youth forums are powerful, but if we leave the youth forums to be just about the youth talking to themselves, where will they get the opportunities, the apprenticeship, the mentoring, where they learn by benefiting from our networks and our opportunities and our resources, those of us who have gone ahead of them. So I think we need to welcome them into the space they have not been in, where we have kept them outside in the hearing space. We need to bring them into the action space. And I think that's where we'll start seeing their leadership being more visible, because they'll be in the space where they can access resources, networks, opportunities to engage policymakers. So I think there's a lot of work for all of us, and I'm looking forward to COP27, having a forum that really moves us from activism to action and providing the leadership space for the youth to engage across the entire value chain. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you, and really well said. And let's hope, our colleagues in Egypt take you into that planning process, because it sounds as if, you really have got the idea and the tone and the approach there signaled very, very succinctly. Thank you very much. And again, my apologies. There are so many hands up. I can't take you. I have to apologize in advance, because I have to, close this show down very, very soon. So I do apologize, even to the private sector I got asked in. I can't take because I don't have enough time. What I do want to do is that we have one of our partners, which is the British Council, the new chief executive there, Scott. Scott, a warm welcome. Sorry it's so late in the day. It's really good to have you with us. But I believe, it's a great opportunity for you to have listened to the power and the passion and the energy of some of the issues as we move forward towards the next COP, but also the work you're doing as the Chief Executive of the British Council. Share with us some of the areas of engagement and action that you want people here to hear.
Thanks, Andrea. I'll be brief, and thanks to everyone for taking part in today's event. From our perspective, because climate change is something that impacts all of us, it's important that we all have a chance to get our voices heard. And many of you have made very clear and brutally clear in some instances today that you want to be more than heard. You want others to listen better, and you want your views to lead to action. So we're delighted to be bringing you all together today in Africa-Europe Week. It's been good to hear the honest and tough discussions. Feels to me like many of those discussions are cutting straight to the core issues, and the debate is moving on from even a few months ago. And I think these conversations and where they can lead are incredibly important for the future. The AEF and the British Council have a shared vision, and that vision is around young people as change makers who need to be at the forefront of the discussion and the action on the global challenges. And my sincere thanks to all of our AEF colleagues for joining forces with us in today's conversation, and I look forward to the continued partnership. Today we've heard youth ambassadors call for continued dialogue, meaningful exchange, and words that turn into actions. And together the AEF and the British Council are committed to supporting you on the journey, and we call upon other like-minded partners to join us. We must create space for meaningful dialogue, to listen and then to offer the skills, opportunities, and the finance needed, as many of you have highlighted today, to put those ideas into action. As the Chief Executive of the British Council, I wholeheartedly encourage a joint effort that spans continents, generations, and demographics. It's only by working together that we can succeed. So let me close just with a final thank you to our speakers, our partners, and audience. I hope you've been inspired and energized, and we look forward to working with you again, and I look forward to hearing the closing remarks from our speakers.
Scott, thank you for being brief, and also, as you know, there is a label, a British Council. I think you're acknowledging that, and we've seen you develop and improve, and also reimagine the role that the British Council can play, especially in this partnership, and also engaging young people. So thank you, and we look forward to British Council under your leadership creating the support and the inclusivity that we want, as we've heard, for the next COP. I'm going to, as I wrap up, I'm going to bring in Delphine, who's from the Tribune Afrique. You're the president of it, in fact, and you're closely involved in the next Africa-Europe Forum under the patronage of Macron in Marseille. So I think it's worth bringing you in very briefly, just to react, if you may, rather than a long. We don't need to know, what's wrong, if I can be so brutal. Tell me what you think should happen.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I'm very happy to be with you today. As you know, we're holding this forum in Marseille on March 17th. Mm-hmm. What is very interesting is that you were talking about cooperation at the state or international level. In Marseille, we're going to focus on cities. Mm-hmm. And to see how in cities we can set up this co-leadership, because from what I heard, it's very important, this term of leadership, how we can have the youth not having their forum on their side and then the politics on their side. So my idea is to invite everybody to be there on March 17th and to make sure that it is an intergenerational forum and moment that we can share together. So we are going to be in partnership with the foundation. So if you are interested, please contact the foundation, and we will be really happy to invite you as a speaker or to attend the meeting and the forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Delphine, just briefly, if I may, what are you going to try and sort of put out there as your big message from this city-to-city cooperation? If there was one sentence that you wanted to use in terms of what's your call for action, what would it be?
Well, actually, La Tribune is a French media based on local news. As one of the young people said, the local action is very important. So our aim is to make sure that apart from the countries, apart from international, we have real cooperation between cities and between young people in the cities. Because as you may know, Marseille is one of the younger cities in France.
Indeed.
We have a big diaspora. So how do we really create link between the different communities, and how do we co-create solutions?
Delphine, thank you. Please do share on the chat how people can engage with you and what they need to do to engage with you. It would be really helpful. I'm now going to turn to our, thank you very much, is Mary. Before I go back to Franz, really would welcome some of your reflections on what you've had. What's your call to action, if you like? Because you've set out, I mean, you worked hard, as you said, on 3 points. Are they the same ones? From what you've heard, are the issues still the same as we had for last time?
In many ways, yes. I think I'm very taken by the way in which young activists now really want to take that responsibility, to be co-responsible for decisions. And we have to make space at the table. I think it would improve hugely decision-making at COP27 if we can do that. I also want women to be at the table.
Indeed.
Just to say, I want a more inclusive COP. And I'm glad that women are quite active, as we saw from Amira speaking today as a young member of the Foreign Relations Committee,
Exactly.
but also speaking on behalf of youth. I think that crossover between women and young people is very important, because we tend to share the same problem solving, but acutely listening and taking on board people's points. And so I do take the point of the young people that resources are important for young people to be able to take the responsibility, which they are clearly ready for and equipped for, but need to be resourced to be able to do it. And that's something that I hope can happen at COP27.
Well, let's look forward to it, and I know you'll continue to work on this agenda as you have for many, many decades. So thank you very much for joining us. And I think, as you say, let's hope that both the Women's Leadership Network and its social capital is able to lever it to bring young people to the table in the way you have in other matters. So let's look forward to using that social capital both in Europe and Africa to ensure young people are involved. So thank you very much for that. Finally, Franz. You've been obviously, as ever, the subject of a lot of attention, as you can imagine, well, for obvious reasons. What's your kind of quick reaction to what you've heard, and what, I suppose, as you move forward, the thing you want to leave this audience with in terms of either a call to action or a kind of key message you want to leave to them as you enter, as Africa EU enter their summit at the end of this week?
Well, first of all, the Sharm el-Sheikh is in Africa. And Africa is a continent that suffers greatly because of the problem that was not created by Africa. So I believe it is important to make sure that when we prepare Sharm el-Sheikh, we pay special attention to the issue that needs to be addressed in Africa, which is adapting to the climate crisis that's already upon us, and making sure to increase the resilience for problems that will come along. And at the same time, this should be prepared by calling on all the major emitters to make sure they do more in mitigating their emissions, because that is the trade-off we need to find in preparing for the next COP. Now, if you want to do that on adaptation, you have to engage with cities. And that's why the Global Covenant of Mayors, which I chair together with Mike Bloomberg, is I think the best way for African cities to be part of the conversation at the table. And if you do that in cities are places where young people dominate, and you can give also through cities young people a much stronger voice in this agenda for change. Now, Africa has the right to make all the mistakes Europe has made in the past in its economic development. Absolutely. But why would you? Learn from our mistakes. And this is specifically addressing the issue of, first of all, energy transition. Why go for fossil if you can go much cheaper through renewables that are plentiful in Africa, and you can reach the most remote communities? Because if once you can bring electricity to remote communities, you will see an explosion in the educational system. You will see an explosion in the talent being tapped of the African youth. If you look at the education in Africa today, when people get into secondary education and into a university, your mind is blown away by the talent Africa has. But that talent is untapped if people can't even get access to electricity at a young age and can't get access to education at a young age. So we need to find concrete ways of stimulating that. I mean, education has been such a part of our debate in the recent COPs and should be put in the central, get a central position in the discussions in Egypt at the end of the year. And finally, you know, I think it is very important that we, because much of this will be public money, and that's our responsibility, but the public money is only a fraction if you compare it to the potential for private investment in Africa. And the private investment will make the difference, because the energy sector is so interested in being part of this development, because bringing energy is bringing development, is bringing opportunity, is bringing education, but let it be the right kind of energy. You're entitled to make the same mistakes we made, but why would you? Don't.
Franz, thank you very much. Good points, powerful points, and I'm sure it's generating a lot of conversation, as you can see on the chat, and this conversation isn't going to go away, obviously. But I want to thank all of you, contributors, speakers, for spending the 90 minutes here, but most importantly, all of you, the couple hundred or more of you who've been on this screen, because actually you make the content of this debate, so you are as important. Thank you very much for being with us. This conversation will continue, and Franz, I agree with you that we didn't mention a lot about the private sector or digital. It feels like that is kind of unattended territory that needs a lot more attention if, as you say, the transformative elements of both of those areas of private and digital are able to be levered in a way that creates fairness, equity, and inclusivity. So let's hope, that the summit later this week, as it starts, sets a different tone of engagement. Obviously, there are a number of other debates happening this week. Keep an eye on our website, on the Africa Europe Foundation website, but also Friends of Europe, for latest updates on what's going on. All that's left for me to say is thank you. Thank you for providing the grist of a very effective debate, and thanks to all of you, especially young people who are here. I am so sorry I couldn't take all of you. I'd love us to go on. I think we should have a dedicated 2 hours every 2 or 3 months, because I know a lot of you would like to do this, but we'll give some thought to that, because actually it's important to keep this dialogue rather than once in 6 months or a year. So thank you all. Mind your distance, keep safe, and thank you again for joining us.